The dinner was already underway when my son-in-law reached across the table and refilled my wife's wine glass without being asked. That was the moment I knew something was wrong with how I'd been reading him. Not the wine. The ease of it. The quiet confidence of a man who belonged exactly where he was sitting. Even though everything in that dining room, the Waterford crystal, the 16-seat mahogany table, the oil portrait of my father-in-law hanging above the fireplace was designed to remind visitors that they did not belong. My daughter had been married to Daniel for 6 years by then. 6 years of holiday dinners where my wife Patricia found reasons to seat him at the far end of the table. 6 years of conversations where my brother-in-law Gerald would ask Daniel about his consulting work in the same tone. A cardiologist might ask a child to explain how a stethoscope works. 6 years of my daughter Claire sitting quietly, eating whatever was in front of her, not looking at anyone directly. I noticed things. That was my habit. Built over 40 years in finance. I noticed the way Daniel never flinched at Gerald's questions. I noticed the way he dressed. Always clean. Always simple. Never trying to impress. I noticed that whenever Patricia made a comment about Claire deserving more, Daniel would look at Claire, not at Patricia, as though Patricia's opinion was weather, unpleasant sometimes, but not something you argue with. I noticed, and I said nothing, because I had married into this family myself. I knew what it cost to hold your ground quietly. What I did not know, what none of us knew, was the specific nature of what Daniel had been holding. I found out on a Tuesday in March, 3 months before the dinner I just described. In a conference room, 42 floors above Michigan Avenue in Chicago. I was there representing my own interests. A company called Meridian Capital Group had quietly accumulated a significant position in Hartwell Industrial, the manufacturing conglomerate my brother-in-law Gerald had inherited from their father and spent the better part of a prosent decade running into the ground. I was on the board of a pension fund that held Hartwell shares. We had been watching the stock decline for 2 years. We had requested a meeting with Meridian's representative to understand their intentions before we decided whether to tender our shares or hold. The man who walked into the conference room that Tuesday was my son-in-law. He was wearing the same kind of clothes he always wore to our family dinners. Dark slacks. A plain gray sweater. No tie. He carried a single leather portfolio. He shook my hand with no more or less warmth than he would have at Christmas. Pulled out the chair across from me. And sat down. I wasn't expecting you. I said. It was the most honest thing I'd said in a boardroom in years. I know. He said. Does Claire know you're here? He looked at me for a moment. Not uncomfortable. Not defensive. Just thinking about how to answer accurately. She knows I work in investment management. She doesn't know the scope of it. I've been working through how to tell her. For how long? Since before we were married. I sat back in my chair. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows behind him, I could see Lake Michigan, gray and flat under the March sky. Gerald doesn't know. I said, it wasn't a question. Gerald has never asked who his shareholders are. Daniel said, he's been too busy with the restructuring to look at the cap table carefully. His advisors know there's a large anonymous institutional position. They don't know it's me personally. How large? He opened the portfolio and slid a single page across the table. I looked at the number for a long time. 31% of Hartwell Industrial, at the current depressed share price. Still worth north of $4 billion. At the price the stock had traded before Gerald's tenure. Worth considerably more. Why? I asked. Because it's a good company being managed badly. Daniel said, the core business is sound. The balance sheet can be repaired. Gerald has made 3 acquisitions in 5 years that had no strategic rationale. 2 of them need to be divested. The manufacturing facilities in Ohio and Tennessee are running at 60% capacity because he cut the maintenance budget to fund a headquarters renovation in Atlanta that nobody asked for. The company can be fixed. That's not what I meant. I said, I meant why the secrecy. Why marry into the family without telling anyone? He was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, his voice was the same as it always was. Even, unhurried. I met Claire at a conference in Boston. He said, She didn't know who I was. She knew her father ran a manufacturing company. She didn't know what I did in any detail. We talked for 3 hours about books, about a hiking trip she'd taken in New Mexico, about her grandmother's garden in Connecticut. He paused. When I called her the next week, she answered because she wanted to talk to me, not because of anything else. And you decided to preserve that. I decided to find out if it was real first, he said, and then I decided to preserve it. Yes. I looked at the page again. The number was still there. Patricia's going to have a great deal to say about this. I said, I expect so. He said, Gerald is going to feel ambushed. Gerald is going to feel many things. Daniel said, I'm more focused on what the company's employees are going to feel when the Ohio facility is running at full capacity again. I thought about the 16-seat mahogany table. I thought about the portrait of my father-in-law above the fireplace, a man who had built something real, and his son who had spent a decade polishing the frame while the canvas rotted. What do you need from me? I asked. Your pension fund's proxy. He said, I have enough to force a board conversation. I don't have enough to make it comfortable. With your fund's support. We can do this without a protracted public fight. And if I don't, he looked at me the same way he looked at Patricia when she made her comments about Claire deserving more, then I'll do it the other way. He said, it'll take longer and it'll be louder, and Gerald will hire PR firms and make it ugly. But the math doesn't change. The company needs new management. I own enough of it to see that happen. The only question is whether it happens cleanly. I gave him the proxy. That was March. The dinner in June was Patricia's idea. She had decided, in the way Patricia decided things suddenly, completely, with total confidence in her own reasoning that it was time for a real conversation with Daniel about his future plans. She had heard from Gerald that there was some activist investor situation with Hartwell, and she had developed a theory that this was a good moment to leverage. Her theory, as best I could reconstruct it, was that with Gerald under pressure, Claire's financial security needed to be ensured through other means. And those other means involved Daniel agreeing to certain arrangements. She had not consulted me before inviting them. She rarely did. Claire and Daniel arrived at 7. My daughter was wearing a blue dress I hadn't seen before. Daniel was wearing dark slacks and a plain sweater. He brought a bottle of wine, which Patricia accepted and set aside without looking at the label. Gerald was already there, which I hadn't expected. He was on his 3rd scotch and in the particular mood he got into when something in the business world had not gone his way. His wife Margaret sat next to him, studying her phone. We sat down to dinner. The conversation moved through the usual channels. Patricia asked about their apartment. Daniel said it was fine. Patricia observed that a 2-bedroom in Lincoln Park was charming for now. Daniel agreed that it was charming. Claire looked at her plate. Gerald asked about Daniel's consulting work with the particular emphasis that meant he had rehearsed the question. It's going well, Daniel said. I ask. Gerald said, leaning forward slightly, because I've been hearing some things about this Meridian situation, the firm that's been causing trouble for my company. He let that sit for a moment. Do you know anything about investment management? Daniel, in your consulting work, a little... Daniel said. I watched my son-in-law's face. It was the same face he always had at these dinners. Attentive. Polite. Patient, in the way that mountains are patient. The reason I ask, Gerald continued, is that I'm going to be in a position soon to offer certain people opportunities. Meaningful opportunities. There may be a role in the new management structure for someone with the right disposition. He smiled. Family is important to me. I want to make sure the people around this table are taken care of. That's generous, Daniel said. Patricia chose this moment. She set down her fork, touched the side of her water glass, and looked at Daniel with the expression she used when she was certain of something. Daniel, she said, I think we've all been patient long enough for a frank conversation. Claire is 34 years old. You've been married for 6 years. You live in a 2-bedroom apartment. You drive a Honda. You work as a consultant, which is a fine thing, but it is not a trajectory. She folded her hands on the table. Gerald is rebuilding Hartwell. There are going to be significant opportunities for the family, but we need to know that our daughter's future is secure. And right now, I'm not sure that it is. The table was quiet. Margaret had put down her phone. Claire was looking at a point somewhere above the centerpiece. I could see the specific quality of her stillness, the stillness of someone who has been in this room, in this conversation, many times before, and has learned how to be present without being there. Daniel looked at Patricia for a moment. Then he looked at Claire. "Sweetheart," he said quietly. My daughter looked at him. "I think it's time," he said. She looked at him for a long moment, and then something shifted in her face. Not surprise, not confusion. Something that looked, from where I was sitting, like relief. "Okay," she said. Daniel reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and set his phone face up on the table. He pulled up a document and slid the phone across to Patricia. Patricia looked at it. Her expression did not change immediately. It changed the way ice changes in spring, not all at once, but with a creaking, structural quality, as though something load-bearing was giving way. Gerald leaned over to look. He was quiet for longer than Patricia had been. "What is this?" Gerald said. It was not entirely a question. "That's a summary of my position in Hartwell Industrial." Daniel said. "Current as of last Friday's close. Meridian Capital." Gerald said slowly. "Is me," Daniel said, "has been me. Personally, and a small number of co-investors I've managed for the past 11 years. The number on the phone was different from the one he'd shown me in March. The stock had moved. The position was worth more now." Gerald put down his scotch glass. Margaret picked up her phone and put it down again. "You've been," Gerald started, "a shareholder in your company." "Yes. For 8 years. Without telling anyone. Investment strategies often require discretion." Daniel said, "That's standard in my industry." "You sat at this table," Patricia said. Her voice had changed. The certainty was still there. But underneath it now was something else. "For 6 years. You sat at this table and I sat at this table, because I'm married to your daughter." Daniel said, "Those are two separate things. They've always been two separate things." "Does Claire know?" Patricia asked. She looked at my daughter when she asked it. Claire was looking at her hands. "I found out in March," she said quietly. "Dad called me the day after the conference room. He told me he thought I needed to know." She paused. "We've been talking about how to do this." Patricia looked at me. "You knew," she said. "I found out in March." I said, "Same as Claire." "And you didn't tell me?" Daniel asked for some time to handle it correctly. I said, "I thought that was reasonable." "Gerald," Patricia said, turning to her brother. "Say something." Gerald had been staring at the phone. He picked up his scotch glass, found it empty, and set it back down. 31%. He said, 31.4. Daniel said, "After last week's purchases, you've been buying more." The stock was undervalued. Gerald looked at his brother-in-law. He was a large man. Gerald, with the physical confidence of someone who had never had to question his place in a room. That confidence had not entirely left him, but it had rearranged itself into something less comfortable. "What do you want?" Gerald said. "I want what I've always wanted." Daniel said, "For the company to be run well, your father built something real. The Ohio facility alone employs 1,100 people. The Tennessee plant has been in that community for 40 years. Those are good jobs. They should still exist in 20 years. And you think I can't. I think," Daniel said carefully, "that the last 3 acquisitions were mistakes. And I think the maintenance budget cuts have created a deferred liability that's going to become a crisis within 18 months. And I think the board has not been giving you the honest advice you need." He paused. "I don't think you're a bad person. I think you inherited a complex business at a difficult time and got some bad counsel. This was, I thought, one of the more generous characterizations of Gerald's tenure that anyone in that room had heard. Gerald seemed to recognize this. Some of the combativeness went out of his shoulders. There's going to be a board meeting in August, Daniel said. I'd like to have a productive conversation before then rather than an unproductive one during. I've engaged an operational consultancy that's done preliminary work on the Ohio situation. I'd like you to meet with them. As a courtesy, Gerald said flatly. Because you own 31% of my company. Because it's your father's company, Daniel said, and I think you care about that. Even when it doesn't look like you do. Another silence. Margaret had been watching this, the way people watch a car, navigate a very narrow bridge. Patricia said, I want to understand something. Her voice had recovered some of its usual character, still certain, but the certainty was now carrying something more complicated. You have been sitting at this table for 6 years. You have led us, she stopped. You let me make assumptions about your circumstances. I didn't correct them. Daniel said, That's true. Why? He looked at Claire before he answered. My daughter was looking at him. Because Claire didn't fall in love with a portfolio, he said. She fell in love with a person, and I needed to know that the person was what she wanted. Not the other thing. He paused. I'm aware that the secrecy has a cost. I've been asking her to forgive me for it for 3 months. I'm still asking. Claire reached across the table and put her hand over his without saying anything. Patricia watched this for a moment. She knew before tonight. Patricia said. She knew and she stayed. Yes, Daniel said. Patricia was quiet for a long time. Outside, I could hear the wind in the oak trees along the back fence. The same trees that had been there when Patricia and Gerald were children. When their father was building the thing that Gerald was now struggling to hold together and Daniel was quietly trying to save, Patricia picked up her fork. She looked at the food on her plate, as though seeing it for the first time. The wine you brought, she said finally. I put it on the sideboard. I know, Daniel said. It's probably better than what we're drinking. It's a good year. Patricia nodded once. Precisely. The way she nodded when she had made a decision, and was not going to discuss it further. She looked at Gerald. Call your assistant in the morning, she said. Get the meeting on the calendar. Gerald looked at his brother-in-law for a long moment. Then he looked at the phone, still sitting face up on the table with the number on the screen. Fine, he said. I got up and retrieved the wine from the sideboard. I found the opener in the second drawer, where it had always been, and I opened the bottle and poured it. When I set a glass in front of Daniel, he looked at me and I looked at him, and I thought about a Tuesday in March, and a conference room 42 floors above the lake, and a man who had walked in carrying a single leather portfolio. Thank you, he said. Thank Claire. I said, she gets credit for her taste in people. My daughter, for the first time all evening, smiled. It was the same smile she'd had as a girl. Before all the dinners and the long silences and the accumulated weight of other people's expectations. Open, unguarded, like she had set something down that she'd been carrying for a long time and was surprised to find that her hands were free. We finished dinner. The wine was excellent. Gerald called his assistant in the morning. The board meeting in August went the way Daniel had said it would go. The Ohio facility began its recovery that fall. The Tennessee plant was still running 3 years later. At full capacity. With a new maintenance program that Daniel had quietly funded before the board had even voted. Claire redecorated the apartment in Lincoln Park. They stayed there for 2 more years before they bought a house. It had a garden. My daughter grew tomatoes. Patricia never again commented on Daniel's car. I noticed that too. It was the kind of thing worth noticing. The greatest lessons are the ones you don't see coming. The most important truths are the ones that have been sitting at your table all along. Quiet and patient. Waiting for the right moment to stand up and introduce themselves. I've been in finance for 40 years. I know how to read a balance sheet. I know how to assess a risk. I know how to tell the difference between something that looks solid and something that actually is. My son-in-law taught me something I hadn't learned in 4 decades of boardrooms. That the most valuable things, the ones worth protecting, worth being patient for, worth sitting through 100 uncomfortable dinners for, are the ones that were never about the numbers at all. He already knew that. He knew it before he walked into that conference room in March. He knew it before the first dinner where Patricia rearranged the seating. He knew it the night he met my daughter in Boston, and she talked about books and a hiking trip in New Mexico and her grandmother's garden. And he thought, this is the thing worth being patient for. I wish I'd seen it sooner. I'm glad I saw it at all.